Welcome to the Deeper Thinking podcast. Why we still can't think beyond capitalism, Mark Fisher, Neoliberalism and Capitalist Realism, is a lyric essay written from inside the atmosphere Fisher named. Rather than explain capitalist realism, it inhabits its emotional logic. Moving through audit culture, branded empathy and digital fatigue, the essay listens for the moments when the spell stutters, when silence, glitch or tonal dissonance briefly rupture the loop. It's not a map out. It's a record of what it feels like to be stuck and still feel something flickering underneath. This is not a biography, not a tribute, not a solution. It is a record of how we live inside a loop we didn't design and can't fully see. A loop that shapes our time, our moods, our sense of what's real. Mark Fisher called it capitalist realism, the widespread belief that not only is capitalism the only viable system, but that imagining a coherent alternative is nearly impossible. This isn't theory, it's atmosphere. We breathe it, perform inside it, joke about it, burn out under it. A system that no longer needs belief to function, only compliance. We, the ones stuck in browser tabs that never close. The ones who track our feelings in apps, draft empathy into bullet points and log performance like proof of personhood. The ones who remember when time felt slow and not because it was efficient. The ones still feeling something, even if we're not sure what it's for. This essay moves inside that condition. It does not diagnose or escape. It listens for where the loop stutters, where the system's rituals misfire or people briefly fall out of sync. It tracks those moments. A song in a meeting, a glitch in a form, a silence that resists being filled. It's a feeling that not everyone's convinced, that something underneath is still vibrating. You won't find resolution here. Only the tone of a spell starting to crack, something loosening in the repetition, something human trying to speak. The world around us hums with a sickening comfort. It's a subtle noise, barely perceptible, yet unmistakable in its consistency. The unspoken reality is that we can imagine the end of the world more easily than the end of capitalism. And perhaps it is this unspoken truth that defines us, this slow march towards a future we cannot name because we've never been allowed to imagine it. A future without capitalism feels like a void, a black hole where the system of human organization that has shaped every decision, every conversation, every thought, suddenly does not exist. It feels impossible, not because we haven't seen collapse before, but because we cannot step outside of a logic that has wrapped itself around us like a second skin. This is the magic trick of capitalist realism. It operates not through force, but through consent, silent, tacit, and embedded so deeply in the framework of thought that to question it feels like questioning existence itself. This is not a conscious decision we make daily. It's the air we breathe. It is the way every major institution shapes itself around a single, unwavering principle: growth. Growth in all its abstracted glory. Growth that justifies inequalities. Growth that mandates competition over collaboration. Growth that masks itself as progress. The moment you ask someone what lies beyond capitalism, the silence that follows is deafening. It's not a matter of having no answer, but of having no language for the answer. We are so thoroughly immersed in this system that we no longer see the chains. We feel them as part of the world, as part of what is just how things are. And therein lies the tragedy. We are trapped not by force, but by our inability to conceptualize an alternative. Neoliberalism, in its most potent form, has taken on a spiritual dimension. It is not merely an economic structure, but a worldview, a paradigm through which every facet of life is mediated. It preaches individual autonomy and self-responsibility, yet it breeds isolation, self-absorption, and a constant undercurrent of competition. What was once sold to us as freedom now feels like a prison, because no matter how hard we fight, no matter how much we strive to break free, we cannot escape the truth. There is no other way. And yet the spell is not perfect. Sometimes it glitches, sometimes it falters mid-sentence, like a moment when the laugh track hits too late or the ad reads your thought before you speak. Something doesn't align. That misstep, barely perceptible, is the leak, the place where the repetition forgets itself. And if there is a way out, maybe it begins there, with the spell stuttering. We learn early not to name the ache, not directly, not when it can be reframed into goals, habits, growth. The culture trains us to metabolize discontent as failure, Not system failure, personal failure. You're not exhausted because the demands are hostile. You're exhausted because you didn't hydrate, didn't journal, didn't optimize. Everything that hurts is rebranded as self-maintenance. Everything that breaks becomes your fault. Capitalist realism doesn't need belief. It needs performance. Show up, check in, respond on time. You can question the system, even joke about it, as long as you never stop acting like it works. That's the spell. Dissent allowed. Defection unthinkable. Fisher warned us that the true triumph of neoliberalism wasn't joy, it was narrowing the field of the imaginable. Not with violence, but with formatting. You don't fight water for being wet. You adjust your expectations. You blame your mindset. You build a morning routine around collapse and call it resilience. We, the ones scrolling endless advice on burnout, framed as a branding issue, the ones instructed to pause and breathe by an app that tracks emotional compliance, the ones told that rest is productive if you can prove it boosted your output, the ones who know something's wrong but find language that doesn't sound like marketing. Underneath the performance, something resists. A manager stares at her own thumbnail for 20 minutes during a Zoom meeting. A student forgets which tab held the assignment. A teacher rehearses a care script and hears herself from the outside. The software works. The behavior tracks, but the world behind it no longer holds. A mindfulness chatbot responds, "That must be difficult," to the phrase, "I want to disappear." A dating app reminds users to smile for their profile video. A campus wellness centre emails a list of resilience exercises after a student dies. None of this is exceptional. It is ambient. The loop goes on, and we keep up, because slowing down feels impolite, disruptive, off-brand, and yet sometimes the tone shifts. A friend plays the Windows 95 startup chime at a party and half the room goes still, not nostalgic, haunted. The sound is not a memory, it's a rupture, something unmonetized, something still flickering underneath the interface. The loop resumes. But the atmosphere has warped, not for long, but long enough to notice. And once you've noticed, the performance doesn't sit the same. The spell still holds, but it stutters now. A breath you didn't plan. A feeling without a goal. A silence that doesn't resolve. There's a scene that plays out across offices, classrooms, hospitals every day. A worker opens a dashboard, updates their quarterly objectives, sits through a wellness check-in scripted by HR. The task is no longer to do meaningful work, it's to document that you're still working. This is audit culture, a logic that values visibility over value and metrics over meaning. Mark Fisher saw this coming. In Capitalist Realism, he described how bureaucratic systems, especially in public services, had become obsessed with performance data, even when the data had no relationship to the purpose of the institution. A teacher spends more time filling in rubrics than teaching. A nurse clicks through endless forms to prove care was given. The process becomes the product. A junior analyst said, "I spent 4 hours updating a dashboard no one reads just so I wouldn't get flagged by the tracking software." A therapist in training confessed, "I log made-up reflections into our compliance portal because if I don't, I can't graduate." These aren't confessions of fraud. They're descriptions of survival inside a system that punishes presence but rewards simulation. The systems have names now. Canvas, Workday, Salesforce, Jira, Concur. They promise efficiency, they deliver repetition. You update your performance goals. You log your personal development. You rank your mental well-being on a scale of 1 to 5. You give the system what it wants. Evidence. Whether or not it reflects reality becomes irrelevant. This is not just red tape, it's a metaphysical shift. Reality isn't what's lived, it's what's logged. A student is not tired, they are underperforming. A worker is not grieving, they are disengaged. A patient is not terrified, they are non-compliant. And so the impulse to reframe becomes second nature. Find the positive angle, the growth opportunity, the action plan. Even when nothing makes sense, the appearance of progress must be preserved. Sometimes the system stutters. A slide won't load. Someone forgets their talking points. A hand is raised, not to contribute, but to ask, does this matter? Not rhetorically, plainly. And in that question, the room feels real for half a second. The meeting resumes, the thread continues, but something stayed behind. The spell works by making its rituals feel inevitable. But they aren't, they're designed, they're enforced, and they can break. not through rebellion, but through dissonance, when someone stops performing the performance, when someone forgets how to smile on cue, when a sentence falls flat and no one rushes to fix it. That silence isn't failure, it's contact, and you don't need permission to notice it. There's a temptation always to blame the villain, to name the CEO, the politician, the billionaire, to believe that if we could just remove the bad actors, the system would work. But Fisher reminds us this is part of the trap. Neoliberalism thrives when it personalizes structural failure. It trains us to moralize dysfunction. He is corrupt, she is incompetent, they are lazy, rather than examine the conditions that make such roles inevitable. This is how structural harm stays invisible, by dressing as personal drama. What begins to fracture here is our relationship to cause. We become narratively addicted to intent. Someone must have meant this to happen, when often what we are witnessing is not conspiracy, but consequence. A logic playing itself out, a system optimizing as it was designed to. If the result is despair, then despair was never the glitch. It was the product. But we weren't told that. We were told to try harder, smile more, set goals, download the app, take the meds, feel better soon. And so the field of visibility narrows. We stop seeing systems and start seeing symptoms. Homelessness becomes a person, not a policy. Burnout becomes your time management issue, not the metricized culture of overwork. Polarization becomes a character flaw, not a reflection of fragmented media architectures that profit from division. Our diagnoses remain shallow because depth requires slowness, and slowness isn't profitable. So we rush, we point, we vote, we unfollow, we feel momentarily better. For the organizer, it lands like this. Every meeting feels like rehearsal for a protest that never arrives. For the parent, the grief is quieter, watching a child dissolve into algorithmic time, eyes open but unreachable. For the mid-level manager, it is numb confusion. If every KPI is green, why does it all feel like it's dying? Realism doesn't erase these reactions, it spreads them out, makes them feel private. The miracle isn't that we're numb, it's that we still notice anything at all. But the ambient dread returns, and beneath it a deeper suspicion that we are not actually choosing, that the choices we are given between brands, between parties, between aestheticized versions of ourselves are not choices at all, but curated distractions, simulations of agency. Capitalism doesn't care what you buy, only that you keep buying. Neoliberalism doesn't care what you believe, only that you keep performing belief. And the result is not persuasion, but exhaustion. A culture so saturated with messaging, with image, with scripted spontaneity that the real begins to feel like a glitch. And sometimes it is. A memory cuts through, a childhood room, a pre-internet silence, the shape of boredom before it became monetizable. These moments don't last, but they come uninvited. They smell like ghosts, and for a breath or two, we remember it wasn't always like this. There's a strange demand that we feel on schedule, that we process grief with poise, that we self-regulate in real time, name our emotions with clarity, and never let them interfere with the flow of the day. The language of care has become a user interface. Scripts of empathy dropped into chats, sentiment recognition built into apps. A workplace pulse survey asks, "How valued do you feel this week?" With clickable emoji faces. You select neutral. The system thanks you for your honesty. We are living through the datafication of emotion. Feelings once private or difficult now appear as metrics, trends, feedback loops, not to create understanding but to signal alignment, to prove morale, to track resilience. You're not allowed to be too quiet for too long. It might flag a concern. But intensity also threatens the brand. So emotions must be moderate, legible, usable. This isn't new, but it has intensified. What Fisher described as the privatization of distress now comes with UX design. Sadness gets flattened into mood journaling features. Rage is repackaged as a learning opportunity. Fatigue is framed as poor boundaries. Even despair finds its channel. Background music tagged emotional but focused. A Spotify ad interrupts and asks if you've tried breathing exercises. The result is a kind of inner lag. A slow dissonance between what's happening inside and what you're permitted to display. You say no problem while your stomach tightens. You click all good after a sleepless night. You practice emotional accuracy for algorithms, not intimacy. The pain isn't gone, it's just been reformatted for circulation. Still, the system is never perfect. Someone forgets to mute. A sigh escapes. A sorry is too sharp. A pause lingers too long. And in that moment, barely perceptible, something breaks protocol. Not dramatically, just enough to remind everyone watching that the interface isn't the whole thing, that there's a body behind the box, that something isn't syncing. No one says anything, but someone turns their camera off. Someone else types, "Can I follow up later?" And the spell for just a breath flickers. The metrics won't catch it. The platform will record compliance. But we were there. We felt the off-tone, the unsmoothed edge, not resistance, not yet, just the signal that something didn't perform right. And that might be enough to notice, enough to remember that the system can't map everything, that some parts still leak. The machinery doesn't pause, it rebrands. Capitalism harvests its own criticism, runs it through Canva, schedules it on Slack, and drops it into Zoom backgrounds. Anti-system slogans arrive as limited edition hoodies. A Netflix docuseries weaponizes our despair as weekend content. The critique is monetized before the anger cools. Resistance feels pre-licensed. The imagination, once a rough field, has become a templated slide deck asking how change will scale. Mutual aid must publish quarterly metrics. A Barrio kitchen is told to integrate Okta for volunteer tracking. Even hope must authenticate. Fisher warned that when everything becomes futurity, the present corrodes. We scroll updates, waitlists, pre-order links. Years loop like identical browser tabs. Culture remixes itself to death, each version sharper, emptier. The future stays stuck on shuffle. Think of capitalist realism as a looped corridor, walls lined with past futures. Every window shows a reboot. Every exit leads back to the same room. Progress turns recursive. We walk the corridor elegantly, in high resolution, going nowhere. They told us it would work. They told us it would click. We kept clicking, refreshing, complying. Lost. Someone clears their throat in the quarterly town hall. A line of text hovers on the shared screen. Connection unstable. The CFO smiles into the void, lips out of sync. In the silence, a junior analyst begins humming the Windows 95 startup chime. A handful laugh, not at the sound, but at the memory of a time when machines booted just once each day. For 3 seconds, the corridor ripples, metrics stall, the spell stutters. Then Zoom recovers and the laughter is muted, but it lingers like static. A whisper braids through the corridor. What if we just stay here? No deliverables, no KPIs, no thread to archive. A second voice answers, "I can't build that." Both voices laugh, fragile, almost warm. It isn't collective action. It isn't even defiance. It is shared breath, unmonetized, unscaled, already fading. After the meeting, the task tracking bot reminds everyone to practice gratitude. The analyst closes the notification without responding. The hum returns, but it carries a fault line now. A hairline crack that wasn't there before. Something slipped through that cannot be tabulated. The corridor resumes its loop. Yet the rhythm is off by a beat, a fractional delay the system cannot smooth. And in that delay, the question survives, small but unlicensed. What happens if the next glitch lasts longer than the patch? The meeting ended, but no one left the call. For a few seconds, there was no movement, just silence, open windows, tired faces. Then someone laughed. Not politely, not performatively, just laughed, like the moment cracked and something real came through. A few others joined, not everyone, but enough to change the air. There was no point to it, no takeaway, no insight, just a shared break in tone. And when the call finally ended, it felt less like a conclusion and more like surfacing, like something unspoken had passed between people who didn't know how to name it, but recognized it all the same. These moments aren't strategy, they're not resistance, they don't fix anything, but they are proof that the loop is not seamless, that the spell doesn't always hold, that beneath the performance of normal, something human still stirs. Not utopia, not revolution, just friction, just a quiet refusal to fully disappear. You can't design for it, you can't replicate it, but you can feel it when it happens, the stutter in the workflow, the off-script pause, the smile that doesn't resolve, the shared breath that breaks the rhythm. These are not signs of failure, they are how we know we're still here. Not everyone will notice, some will laugh it off, some will log off, some will reload the dashboard and keep going, but someone will carry that feeling forward, not as hope, not as memory, as glitch, as tone, as something not quite processed that might in another moment become a crack, a breach, a way out we can't yet describe. The loop continues. But something is slightly off now. The spell stutters just a little. But once it does, it can't return to silence. There's a line near the end of Fisher's work where the spell falters. He doesn't offer a solution. He doesn't call for revolution. He just gestures, quietly, urgently, toward the possibility that the spell can be broken, not by force, not by persuasion, but by memory, by the flicker of something we once sensed and were told to forget. This is not nostalgia, it is reactivation, a psychic remainder that realism cannot metabolize. A fragment of the unpermitted future still smouldering beneath the surface. We do not lack imagination, we are full of it, but we have been trained to aim it downward into ourselves, into productivity, into survival. What we no longer know how to imagine is the collective, not the fantasy of agreement, but the risk of alignment, the discomfort of seeing one another outside the logic of value. Capitalism makes this hard on purpose. It teaches us to fear entanglement, to dread reliance, to mistrust slowness. But the future will not be an optimized outcome. It will be a flawed encounter, messy, partial, and radically interdependent. Fisher asked, what would it mean to treat our depressive realism not as pathology, but as recognition, not as failure, but as signal? What if the flatness is not a personal collapse, but a system reaching the edge of its spell? This doesn't mean despair is liberation, but it means despair might be the beginning of honesty. And from that honesty, a new kind of realism might emerge, not capitalist, not utopian, but attuned, a realism that lets contradiction breathe, that lets silence return, that allows us to see the system not as total, but as fraying at the edges, because it is fraying in every burnout email, in every absurd reorg, in every crisis declared normal, in every young person asking why they feel nothing. The signs are not dramatic, they're ambient, but they're there, they hum beneath the audit sheets. They live in the half-second pause before the meeting starts. They surface in the moment someone asks, is this it? And maybe that question is enough. Maybe realism doesn't end with an answer, but with a refusal to keep pretending the answers we've been given still work. This isn't the moment for new ideology. It's the moment for rehearsal, for trying out the tones of a different kind of world. Not because we're ready, but because the present can no longer be sustained. The voice that said it clearer than most is gone, but the echo got louder. If the spell of capitalist realism is to be broken, it will not be broken by argument, sharper critique, or even moral urgency. It will be broken when something no longer functions, quietly beneath the metrics, when what once felt inevitable begins to feel absurd, when the next meeting is no longer endurable, when optimization becomes unbearable, when silence, real silence, is no longer terrifying. This is not an ending. This is a return to listening, to the thin signal beneath the noise, to the part of the self that was told to wait until the system made room. It never did, and it won't. But that self, the one that remembered care before performance, slowness before deliverables, relation before rank, is still here, not healed, not ready, but present. We begin perhaps not with vision, but with fidelity to that presence. We begin with the question, asked not rhetorically, but tremblingly, what if this isn't all there is? And then we wait, not for the answer, but for the resonance, for the moment someone else replies, not with certainty, but with breath, that pause, that impossibly fragile agreement that yes, this doesn't feel right, that yes, we are still here, that no, the future hasn't been sold off yet, not entirely. So we hold the unfinished line, the fracture that refuses closure, the knowledge that we are not alone in the not knowing. Fisher did not leave us a blueprint, he left a breach, an opening in the sentence, a gap between diagnosis and dream. It is not our task to fill it, it is our task to protect it from closure, to keep it unstable, to keep it alive. Because that gap, the one realism cannot metabolize, is where the future might begin. Not the future of slogans or timelines or scalable deliverables, but the future that arrives bent, hesitant, unprofitable. The future that does not ask to be sold. The future that hums in a key we haven't yet named. The one that doesn't resolve, the one that listens back.